Hello, I'm Matthew Gavidia. Today in the MGH Life Sciences Medical World News, the Center for Biosimilars is pleased to welcome Dr. Surya Singh, President and owner of Singh Healthcare Advisors LLC, based in Lexington, Massachusetts. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
I'm a physician by training and now run an independent consultancy where I provide advisory services to a variety of different stakeholders in healthcare. My background prior to this consultancy is more on the managed care side. I spent 7 years as the chief medical officer of the specialty pharmacy at CVS, and several years before that in small companies that did sort of informatics services and products for payers.
What are the conflicts between a payer's desire to obtain the lowest cost drug for plan participants and its desire to strike a profitable deal with manufacturers and developers?
Yeah, so I think in response to that question, which is one about, what is the motivation, essentially, the payer's desire based on their motivations, largely ability to be able to service their memberships and the economic incentives that they have. And I think a lot of people sort of see it as there's a inherent conflict that's brought up in that question in trying to get to the lowest net cost medication that they cover and the out-of-pocket costs for the plan participant, and then what is a profitable deal. So I guess there's really kind of three things to consider. Just to take them one by one, the place where there's the most conflict right now is in what is the actual lowest net cost and what is the lowest out-of-pocket cost drug or product selection for the individual, for the patient or member, depending on your perspective. Those aren't always the same thing. And that's all because of the size of the rebates and what a lot of people, including I have referred to as this gross to net bubble, where the gross price of the medication is diverging even further from the net price of the medication. The size of the rebate is really big. I think the old way of the economics working was that rebate did tie to a higher margin for essentially the managed care organization that was negotiating the deal. That's really no longer true in most cases. In most cases, the managed care entity has the most economic incentive to get to the lowest net cost. Unfortunately, what happens is that the size of that rebate that is being passed through, especially in ASO or administrative services only business with employer-sponsored commercial plans, the size of that rebate actually covers lots of other programs. So, but just going back to those three considerations, the conflict that exists that I point out a lot to people is between really what the lowest net cost agent is and what provides the lowest out-of-pocket expense for the patient.
How are these decisions affecting the end user, such as patients and providers, when it comes to cost and access to biosimilars?
Okay. Yeah, let me take those one at a time, each stakeholder group. And I think, just in the spirit of building on the response I had to the last question with patients. So when you really kind of think about access to biosimilars, I'll just broaden it and say access to medication that has the least amount of let's call it barriers, including economic barriers to the patient being able to take it. And sort of the decisions that are being made based on what I outlined before, these two kind of economic considerations. What's the lowest net cost agent in the class, and what is provides the lowest out-of-pocket expense for the patient, are not always the same thing. And so for patients, it leads to a situation where in some of the classes, it's become common for what ultimately is the lowest net cost agent, because of a large rebate, results in them having a higher out-of-pocket expense. And that in turn means that with a higher out-of-pocket expense, they're more likely to not be able to afford it at all. They can't get enrolled in an appropriate patient assistance program that can help them with out-of-pocket expense, especially in a higher tier coinsurance situation. And therefore, we have a lower overall adherence and persistence. So I think on the patient side, that's what we worry about, at least, is one, sort of part of the question. And I can elaborate on that, but just in the interest of covering the providers too, for the providers, I think it means that, in terms of access to biosimilars, biosimilars, because of that dynamic, are not always the preferred agent, even though they might have the lowest net cost. And that has a lot of people, sort of up in arms about biosimilar adoption. But from the perspective of, trying to keep patient out-of-pocket expenses as low as possible, there are kind of other considerations to take into account. And then, so the last thing I'll say is that can be frustrating for providers as an end user group is the sort of amount of the rebate that's passed through that I referenced before can be used to offset either premium or other clinical programs and other things by the plan sponsor. And it's especially notable when the plan sponsor is an employer.
What's happening on the potential savings from the introduction of a biosimilar at, say, a 15% discount? Is this savings going to the payer? Is it evaporating in the deal making, or is it trickling down to the provider and the patient?
The 15% discount, I guess, first, just in terms of definition, I'm just going to outline what I interpret as the intent of that question. I think the intent is, if a biosimilar launches at a 50% discount to the incumbent brand, right? And let's say that discount is in terms of WAC, wholesale acquisition cost, that now that 15% discount is either, going to be passed through the plan sponsor. So it can be the payer or employer, whoever the ultimate payer of claims is. The second, so first answer is, if that biosimilar ends up being the preferred agent on the formulary because it has the lowest net cost, those savings do go to the risk-bearing entity, to the ultimate plan sponsor. So that's my first answer. Is it ever evaporating in the deal making is kind of the second question. No, I wouldn't. I don't think saying that savings goes away is in my mind, is anything that I can imagine occurring. The savings don't evaporate. What's happening is sometimes those savings aren't being taken advantage of because the incumbent brand decides that they're going to offset some of that new 15% decrement in the form of a larger rebate in order to maintain their share. And the larger rebate, because the plan sponsor, whatever type of entity that is, again, including in that definition, employers, the plan sponsor says a 10% greater rebate with no quote unquote disruption, so people stay on exactly what they were on. That's ultimately a better decision for them. And so again, there's some inconsistency in whether the biosimilar at the absolute lowest net cost, if that's the case, if it really is the absolute lowest net cost, is getting selected as the preferred agent, or whether a better deal, essentially, to use the same language as in the question, a better deal is offered by the incumbent brand, and so the preferred drug stays the same.